NFL Network, Cameron Wolfe, was at the Cleveland Browns practice on day 2. And I'm telling you, he didn't hold back on what he had to say about the quarterback competition between Shedeur Sanders and Deshawn Watson. Listen, also, Shedeur Sanders got a new commercial coming out with Nike, and he said, "Prime, you know I had to let the top back." Check it out.
No, Prime, I had to.
He was booed on the practice field. 2 days later, he threw the pass that made grown men run onto the grass screaming. That's not a script. That's Cleveland, Ohio, right now, in the middle of one of the strangest quarterback battles the NFL has seen in years. Somewhere between a Nike commercial and a training camp rep count, a kid who was supposed to be an afterthought in this draft class is starting to look like something else entirely. And nobody in that building can tell you for certain who's going to be starting under center in week 1. But the players already have an idea. And that, right there, is where this story really begins. Let's talk about the weight this young man is carrying, because it did not start this week, and it is not going away anytime soon. Every quarterback taken on day 3 of the draft is supposed to disappear quietly into a practice squad somewhere. That's the deal. That's how it's supposed to go. Shedeur Sanders did not get that memo, or if he did, he threw it in the trash. He walked into Cleveland with a last name that guarantees cameras, a draft slide that guaranteed doubt, and a locker room that had every reason to write him off before he ever took a snap. Think about that for a second. This isn't a first-round golden boy with a red carpet rolled out in front of him. This is a guy who had to claw for reps most rookies get handed. And somehow, according to people actually standing on that practice field, he's not just keeping up, he's pulling away. Now here's where the tension really kicks in, because this story isn't just about talent, it's about a locker room split down the middle, a coaching staff refusing to tip its hand, and a fan base that cannot agree on a single thing about this kid. The media narrative on Shedeur Sanders has never been simple. Half the coverage treats him like the second coming, the flashy, confident, camera-ready quarterback built for primetime. The other half treats him like a cautionary tale, a name that fell too far, a personality that rubbed people the wrong way before he ever earned the right to have one. Both versions have been repeated so many times that people forget to just watch the tape. And when you watch the tape, something interesting happens. The doubt starts to look a little less convincing. People who cover this team closely, guys who are in that building every single day, have started saying the quiet part out loud. Through the opening stretch of training camp, Sanders has been getting the bulk of the first-team reps, and by most honest accounts on the ground, he's been the most productive quarterback out there. Clean decisions, fewer wasted throws, a 2-minute drill late in a tired, sloppy practice that looked sharp when almost nothing else did. That's not nothing. That's a quarterback doing his job when the details around him are falling apart.
Nike getting ready to partner up again with a commercial. I'm telling y'all right now, Shedeur Sanders is feeling himself. He's back to the old Shedeur Sanders that we used to see him play the quarterback position. Now, let's go over to the NFL Network and listen to what Cameron Wolfe had to say about practice yesterday. Cameron Wolfe.
Yeah, Patrick, as you mentioned, Shedeur Sanders got all of the 1 reps and by far the most reps of any of the quarterbacks.
But let's not pretend this is a fairy tale, because it isn't. There are real, documented concerns from the coaching staff, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. The offensive coordinator has been pushing him hard on tempo, on getting out of the huddle faster, on tightening up the operations so the offense doesn't bog down under pressure. That's a real note. That's not media noise. That's a coach telling a young quarterback, you're close, but close isn't enough yet. And that's the tension line running through this entire camp. Talent versus polish. Instinct versus discipline. A kid who clearly has the arm and the poise, going head-to-head with a proven former franchise passer who has nothing left to prove and everything left to fight for. Because let's be honest about the other side of this competition too. Deshawn Watson is not some anonymous tamp body standing in the way. He was once one of the most talked about quarterbacks in football. He has the resume, the contract, the expectations that come from a franchise that bet everything on him. This isn't a battle between a starter and a stopgap. This is a genuine fight, and it has not been decided. So how do you measure something like this in real time? You watch the moments that aren't scripted. You watch how a team reacts when nobody's telling them how to feel. There's a rep that's been talked about quietly around the building. A moment when Sanders was supposed to play it safe, get the offense in position for a simple field goal, take the conservative route late in a tight practice period. Instead, he pushed the ball downfield, found his receiver, and turned what should have been 3 points into a touchdown to end a walk-off drive. And the reaction on that field wasn't quiet. Veterans who don't usually show much of anything came running out to celebrate like it actually meant something. That's the kind of moment that doesn't show up in a stat sheet, but it shows up in a locker room's memory. Because grown men, professionals who've seen 100 camp practices, don't sprint onto a field for nothing. They do it when something in front of them actually feels different. Compare that to what happened with Watson. Just 1 day prior, when he jogged out for his own practice reps, the crowd that showed up to watch didn't offer him the same energy. He got booed. Not by opposing fans, not by strangers, by the very fan base that's supposed to be in his corner. That's a brutal thing to sit with. That's a locker room and a fan base sending two very different messages within 48 hours of each other. Now, does the front office actually care what the crowd thinks? Not officially, not on paper. Coaches will tell you all day long that fan reaction doesn't decide a depth chart, but you'd be lying if you said it means nothing. Perception builds pressure, pressure builds urgency, and urgency has a way of forcing decisions that coaches swear they're not ready to make yet. Here's what we know for certain about the plan moving forward. Both quarterbacks are going to get real preseason opportunities. One will start the first exhibition game, the other gets the start in the second. And by the time that third preseason game rolls around, the version of this team that actually plans to win in week 1 will have to show its hand. That's not speculation. That's the roadmap the coaching staff has already laid out. Which means the next few weeks aren't just camp reps anymore. They're auditions with real stakes, in front of real crowds, with a real opponent standing on the other sideline. No more protected reps, no more forgiving practice field mistakes. This is the part of the story where excuses start running out. So let's talk about who Shedeur Sanders actually is when the lights get brighter, because that's where his story has always taken an interesting turn.
Completed a lot of overall passes, and he led an excellent 2-minute drill late in practice. But I will say this was a very dog days of practice type practice. There were some pre-snap procedural penalties. There were some guys injured. It just felt like guys were tired and trying to get through it. There were some drops. But ultimately, I think it's a sign of how camp is going for these quarterbacks so far. Shedeur is taking care of the ball a little better than Deshawn Watson at this stage. He's shown growth in how he's going through his progressions, but that's an area that Todd Monken tells me he still wants to see him improve his operation.
There's a pattern with this kid that people who followed him closely keep bringing up. He doesn't shrink when the competition gets harder. He locks in. Every level he's played at, every time someone said he wasn't ready, wasn't good enough, wasn't built for this next step, something in him seemed to switch on instead of off. That's not a guarantee he wins this job. Talent alone never is. But it's a psychological profile that matters in professional football, where the margin between confidence and collapse is razor thin. Watch him on tape, and you start to see the small things that separate a prospect from a professional. The ball isn't hanging in the air. It's not drifting off target. It's landing in tight windows, over defenders' shoulders, exactly where only his receiver can get to it. His feet are set. His eyes are moving through progressions instead of locking onto one read and hoping. He's operating inside a structure instead of trying to freelance his way out of trouble. That's not flash. That's a quarterback learning to play within a system built for winning, not for highlight reels. And then there's the branding piece, because you can't talk about Shedeur Sanders without acknowledging the noise that follows him everywhere. Around the same time this camp batter heated up, a new Nike commercial dropped featuring him and his father, leaning into that same confident, unapologetic energy that has defined his whole career. Critics will say it's a distraction. Supporters will say it's proof he's built for this level of attention. The truth is probably somewhere in between. But one thing is clear. The spotlight isn't shrinking, and he isn't hiding from it. That's the gamble Cleveland made when they brought him in. You don't get the polished, safe version of a prospect. You get the version that comes with commercials, with headlines, with a father who built an entire brand out of confidence. The question this franchise has to answer isn't just can he play. It's can this organization handle everything that comes attached to him if he becomes the guy. If you're just now finding this story, hit subscribe, because this quarterback battle is nowhere close to finish, and you're going to want to be here when it is. So where does this leave us heading into the preseason? Nobody inside that building is willing to hand this job to anybody yet, not officially. The coaching staff has been careful, almost deliberately careful, about not naming a starter this early. They want to see it in real games, against real opponents, when the results actually count. That patience is smart. It's also excruciating for everyone watching from the outside. But here's the thing about locker rooms. They know things before the rest of us do. Players talk, players watch, players decide quietly who they trust to lead them onto a field when everything is on the line. And based on what's leaking out of that building right now, a growing number of them already believe they know the answer. That doesn't mean it's decided. Watson has been here before. He has the physical tools to take this job back at any moment, and counting him out this early would be its own mistake. Careers change direction in a single preseason series. Everybody in that quarterback room knows it. What we do know is this: a kid who fell further than almost anyone expected on draft weekend is now the one setting the pace in Cleveland's quarterback room. He's not just surviving in that competition, he's dictating the terms of it. And maybe that's the real story here, not whether Shedeur Sanders wins this job by September, but what it says about him that with everything stacked against him, with every doubt thrown his way, with boos raining down on the guy standing across from him, he's the one making his teammates run onto that field like something special just happened. Because in the end, football doesn't care about draft position. It doesn't care about narratives written before a single real game is played. It only cares about what happens when the ball is in your hands and the lights are on. Right now, in Cleveland, the lights are getting brighter every single day, and Shedeur Sanders doesn't look like he's blinking. Let's rewind for a second, though, because to really understand why this moment matters, you have to understand what it took to get here.
Clear to me, he wants one of these guys to show himself, make clear that I am the starter. That has not happened at this stage where one of these guys have just run away with it. But from what I've heard and what I saw today, if I was handicapping this race, I'd say Shedeur Sanders has a slight edge. Also worth noting, they're going to have their preseason games. Monken told me that he's going to start one guy the first preseason game, the other will start the second preseason game, and at that point they will start to go upon the process of making the decision for the starter. They obviously want to have one for week one, but they are not.
Draft weekend was supposed to be a coronation. Instead, it turned into one of the most talked about slides in recent memory. Team after team passed, round after round went by. Cameras caught every uncomfortable second of it, every forced smile, every quiet moment of a kid trying to hold it together in front of the entire country while his name kept getting skipped. That kind of thing doesn't just embarrass a player. It follows him. It gets replayed. It gets turned into jokes, into hot takes, into a permanent asterisk that analysts love to bring up anytime his name comes up again. And it would have been easy, understandable even, for that kind of fall to break a young player's confidence. Instead, by every account coming out of Cleveland, it did the opposite. It sharpened something in him. That's the part of this story that's easy to miss if you're only paying attention to highlight clips and social media clips. This isn't just a talent evaluation, it's a psychology test. Because the NFL is full of players with better arms, better size, better measurables than guys who end up starting for a decade. What separates them is usually what's happening between the ears. And right now, everything coming out of that Cleveland facility suggests Shedeur Sanders is passing that test in a way people didn't expect. Now, let's talk about the noise, because there's always noise around this kid, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest storytelling. Every time Shedeur Sanders has a good practice, there's a headline about it within the hour. Every time he throws an interception in a scrimmage, that clip gets 10 times the engagement of any of his good throws. That's just the reality of covering a player with this much built-in attention. His last name alone guarantees more eyeballs than most rookies will ever get. And with that attention comes a level of scrutiny that most 20-something-year-olds never have to face in any profession, let alone one played out in front of millions of people every single week. Critics point to the flash. They point to the confidence, sometimes read as arrogance, that comes through in interviews and social media posts. They point to a draft process that, fair or not, left a permanent mark on how casual fans view him. And look, some of that criticism isn't baseless. Confidence without results can look a whole lot like empty talk. That's exactly why this training camp matters so much. It's the first real chance for that confidence to be measured against something concrete. And so far, measured against something concrete, he's holding up. Supporters point to something different. They point to composure under pressure. They point to a kid who has been doubted at every single level of his career and has answered those doubts the same way every time. Not with words, but with performance. High school doubters, college doubters, draft doubters, now NFL doubters. The chorus changes, but the response from him has stayed remarkably consistent. That consistency is what's starting to shift the tone in Cleveland. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily, rep by rep, practice by practice. The conversation inside that building has started to change from can he compete to how much room does he actually have to grow. Let's get back to the football itself for a second, because at the end of the day, that's what actually decides these things. Not commercials, not headlines, not fan reactions in the stands. The 2-minute drill matters more than people realize. It's one of the purest tests you can run on a quarterback because it strips away the luxury of time. There's no huddle to slow things down, no committee meeting at the line of scrimmage. It's fast decisions, clean mechanics, and a mental clock running the entire time.
When a young quarterback can operate that drill cleanly, especially late into practice when the entire team is gassed and sloppy and looking for reasons to give up on the period, that tells you something real about his mental makeup. That's exactly the situation Sanders was dropped into. Tired legs around him, frustration building, drops happening, procedural penalties piling up. And in the middle of all that mess, he ran a drill that looked sharp, controlled, and confident. That's not luck. That's preparation showing up exactly when it's needed.
Practices in the spring and early practices in the camp have certainly helped himself in a competition that looked early on it might go Deshawn's way.
That's the NFL Network, Cameron Wolfe, giving you his take of what he saw on yesterday during the Cleveland Browns training camp. One thing I can say about Shedeur Sanders, he's ready. Shedeur Sanders has outperformed each quarterback in the Cleveland Browns room so far. But when you see him take the practice field, this is what excites.
Compare that to the areas where he's still being pushed. The tempo issue, the operation speed out of the huddle, isn't a small note. In the NFL, operational speed can be the difference between a play call actually working and a play call getting blown up before it even starts, because a defense had extra seconds to diagnose it. Coaches don't harp on details like that unless they believe a player is close enough for those details to actually matter. You don't coach up a lost cause. You coach up someone you think is almost there. So when people ask what the coaching staff really thinks about this competition, the honest answer is complicated. Publicly, they've stayed neutral. They've refused to hand the job to anyone. They've built a preseason plan specifically designed to force both quarterbacks to earn it in live competition, rather than in practice reps alone. That's not indecision. That's due diligence. But privately, the fact that specific technical notes are being given to one quarterback and not talked about nearly as much for the other tells its own quiet story. Now let's shift to the locker room, because this is where things get emotional and where the human side of this story really lives. Football players talk about trust in a very specific way. It's not about who's the most talented guy in the room. It's about who they believe in when a game is on the line. Fourth quarter, ball in his hands, season hanging on the next 15 seconds. That kind of trust isn't handed out based on draft position or contract size. It's earned in exactly the kind of moments this camp has already produced. That touchdown throw, the one that turned a simple field goal situation into a full-blown celebration, wasn't just a good play. It was a signal. Veterans on that roster have been through enough camps, enough quarterback competitions, enough disappointing seasons to know the difference between a flashy moment and a meaningful one. When guys who don't normally show much emotion sprint across a practice field to celebrate a rookie's decision-making, that's not hype. That's belief forming in real time. And then there's the other side of that same coin, the booing. Hearing your own home crowd turn on you, even in a low-stakes training camp environment, is one of the more brutal experiences a professional athlete can go through. It doesn't matter how many playoff games you've won in the past, or how much money is written into your contract. In that moment, on that field, the fans made their frustration clear, and it wasn't quiet about who they wanted to see. Neither of those moments decides a starting job on their own, but together, they paint a picture of a fan base and a locker room that are at the very least leaning in one direction, even if the coaching staff hasn't officially followed yet. If this story is pulling you in, now's the moment to hit subscribe, because the next few weeks of preseason football are going to answer questions this entire piece has been building toward, and you don't want to miss how it plays out. So what actually happens next? The preseason schedule is set up almost like a courtroom. Both quarterbacks get their turn to make a case. One gets the first exhibition start in front of a national audience against real NFL competition instead of scout team defenders. The other gets the second game, same stakes, same pressure, same cameras. And by the time the third preseason game rolls around, the organization has essentially promised that a decision framework will start to take shape, built on what actually happened on the field, rather than what's been whispered about in practice reports. That third game is where this entire story is heading. Not the commercials, not the social media clips, not even the practice reports that have dominated headlines throughout camp. Live football, real defenses, real consequences. And that's exactly why this competition has captured so much attention. It's not just about one team's depth chart. It's a referendum on how much weight a draft slide should really carry. It's a test of whether preparation and mental toughness can outweigh measurables in draft capital. It's a story about a kid who got told publicly and repeatedly that he wasn't good enough, and is now standing on an NFL practice field making some of the league's toughest, most experienced evaluators second-guess that entire narrative. There's still a version of this story where Deshaun Watson reclaims that job outright. He's earned the benefit of the doubt through his own career, and camp battles have flipped before in a matter of days. Nobody serious about football should count him out this early. But there's also a version of this story, and it's the version gaining momentum with every practice, where a kid who fell out of the first 3 rounds ends up becoming the face of this franchise's next chapter. Either way, one thing is already true. Shedeur Sanders forced his way into this conversation. He didn't get handed a path. He built one, rep by rep, throw by throw, in front of a locker room that's not watching a lot more closely than anyone expected this early in camp.
Right now, in Cleveland, the lights are getting brighter every single day, and Shedeur Sanders doesn't look like he's blinking.